Before there were maps, before there were borders, before anyone knew how large the earth truly was, human beings looked at the horizon and wondered what existed beyond it. Small communities lived beside rivers, lakes, and coastlines, planting crops in fertile soil, following animals across open plains, and building homes from mud, wood, and stone. They watched the seasons return year after year, and for most of their lives the world around them probably seemed permanent. The river would rise in spring, the rain would come and go, the sun would disappear every evening and return the next morning, while the mountains remained where they had always been. And then sometimes the water did something unexpected. A river escaped its banks, a storm refused to end, the rain continued for days, and the ground beneath a settlement disappeared beneath dark water. Fields vanished, animals fled, homes collapsed, and everything that had seemed permanent suddenly became fragile. For a people who possessed no satellites, no weather forecasts, and no instruments capable of measuring a distant storm, such an event could feel like the end of the world. Not simply the end of one village or the destruction of one valley, but the end of everything they knew. And perhaps this is where one of humanity's oldest stories begins. A story about water, a story about destruction, a story about survival, and a story about starting again. Across the ancient world, versions of this story appear in cultures separated by enormous distances, from Mesopotamia and the Hebrew tradition to Greece, India, China, the Americas, and the islands of the Pacific. In Mesopotamia, ancient scribes recorded tales of a devastating flood in which a chosen man was warned of destruction and instructed to preserve life. In the Hebrew tradition, Noah receives a similar warning. A great vessel is built, animals are gathered, the waters rise, and an old world disappears beneath the flood. In Greece, the story takes another form as Deucalion and Pyrrha survive a catastrophic flood sent by the gods, and when the waters finally retreat, they face an empty world and the task of beginning again. In India, Manu encounters a mysterious fish that warns him a great flood is coming, and once again, survival becomes the beginning of a renewed world. Farther east, ancient Chinese traditions preserve memories of enormous floods that challenged entire populations and transformed the land, while traditions across the Americas and the Pacific also tell of worlds destroyed, transformed, or renewed through water. The stories are not identical, and this is important. Some describe a flood covering everything, while others describe enormous regional waters. Some focus on divine punishment, while others focus on transformation. Some preserve a single survivor, others remember entire communities. Some speak of gods, while others barely mention them. So perhaps we should not begin with the assumption that all these stories describe the same event. Instead, we should begin with a simpler question. Why is water so often chosen to represent the destruction of the old world? Because water has always carried a strange duality. It gives life, and it can take life away. A river can turn dry soil into farmland, while the same river can destroy a settlement when it escapes its banks. Rain can make a harvest possible, while too much rain can erase that harvest in a matter of hours. The sea can provide food and a path to distant lands, but the sea can also swallow entire coastlines. For ancient people, there was no clear boundary between nature and the supernatural. A violent storm was not simply weather. It could be a message, a drought could be a punishment, and an earthquake could be the anger of a god. And a flood could become something far larger than a natural disaster. It could become judgment, cleansing, death, and rebirth. This may help explain why flood traditions became so powerful, but it does not completely explain their remarkable distribution. Consider the distances involved. Mesopotamia lies thousands of kilometers from India, India lies thousands of kilometers from Greece, and China developed its own ancient traditions far to the east. The civilizations of Mesoamerica developed across an ocean from the Old World, while the peoples of Polynesia lived among islands scattered across one of the largest expanses of ocean on Earth. And yet, again and again, water appears, a world threatened by destruction, a warning, a struggle for survival, and then a beginning. Could this be coincidence? Perhaps. Flooding is one of the most universal natural disasters on Earth, and almost every major civilization developed around water. The great civilizations of antiquity often grew beside rivers, including the Nile, the Euphrates, the Tigris, the Indus, and the Yellow River. These rivers made civilization possible, providing drinking water, carrying nutrients into agricultural fields, creating transportation routes, and supporting cities. But they also contained an invisible danger. The same water that created civilization could destroy it. Imagine living thousands of years ago beside one of these rivers. There are no concrete barriers, no modern drainage systems, no accurate weather predictions, and no emergency broadcasts. You wake before sunrise and the river looks higher than it did yesterday, then higher again. The soil beneath your feet becomes mud, the animals become restless, and people begin moving their belongings to higher ground. But the rain continues, and eventually the river no longer has a recognizable edge. Water moves through the streets, enters homes, and carries branches, animals, tools, and pieces of wood, while the familiar landscape begins to disappear. The place where your house stood yesterday is now beneath the surface. The fields are gone, the road is gone, the neighboring village is gone. And when the water finally retreats, the world you knew may no longer exist. For the survivors, this would not simply be an event. It would become memory, and memory becomes story. A child who survives might hear the story from a parent, and that child might repeat it to their own children. Generations pass, names change, details change, and the original location may eventually be forgotten. The size of the disaster may grow, and the flood that once covered a valley may eventually be remembered as a flood that covered the world. This process is not difficult to imagine. Human beings have always transformed memories into stories, and stories are remarkably durable. A city can disappear, a language can disappear, a kingdom can collapse, but a story can survive. It can travel through generations without a single written word, repeated beside a fire, inside a temple, during a ceremony, or beside the water itself. Perhaps this is why the flood story feels so ancient. It is not merely a story about water, it is a story about memory. A memory of a world that existed before the survivors, a world that was destroyed, and a world that came afterward. And perhaps that is why flood mythology is so closely connected with creation mythology. The destruction of one world becomes the birth of another. The waters erase the old landscape, then life returns. The survivors step onto dry land, animals emerge, plants grow, people rebuild, and the story begins again. The flood becomes a dividing line between two ages, before and after, and perhaps that is why the image of a great flood remains so powerful even thousands of years later. But now we reach the question that has fascinated historians, archaeologists, theologians, and storytellers for centuries. Was there ever a single flood large enough to inspire these traditions? There is no accepted scientific evidence for a worldwide flood, covering the entire planet in human history. And that distinction matters. The stories themselves are ancient and culturally significant, but a story is not automatically proof that the event happened exactly as described. There is another possibility. Perhaps there were many floods, many disasters, many communities, and many memories. And perhaps human beings living in very different parts of the world independently discovered the same terrifying truth. Civilization is vulnerable. The land beneath your feet can disappear, the river that feeds you can destroy you, and the sea that surrounds you can cross the boundary between safety and catastrophe. And when people try to explain such an event, they tell a story about the day the water came, a story about the people who survived, a story about the world that was lost, and a story about what came next. Tonight we are going to follow those stories, not to prove that every flood myth describes the same historical event, and not to turn ancient traditions into modern conspiracy, but to ask a more interesting question. What can these stories tell us about the people who created them? What disasters might have inspired them? What landscapes disappeared beneath ancient waters? And why, after thousands of years, does the image of a world drowned by water still remain so powerful? To find the beginning of this mystery, we must travel back to one of the oldest civilizations known to history. A land between two great rivers, a land where cities rose from mud, where writing first recorded the thoughts of ancient people, and where, thousands of years ago, someone wrote down a story about a flood, a story that would survive long after the world that created it had vanished. The rivers were the Tigris and the Euphrates. The land was Mesopotamia. And somewhere within the oldest layers of its literature, the memory of a great flood was waiting. This is where our journey begins. In the fertile lands between two great rivers, long before the rise of Greece or Rome, the first cities of human civilization began to stir. Here, along the winding channels of the Tigris and the Euphrates, the ancient Sumerians built towering temples and recorded their thoughts upon soft clay tablets. For thousands of years, these fragile clay records lay buried beneath desert sands, forgotten by time and sheltered from the changing centuries above. Then, in the 19th century, archaeologists excavating the lost library of Nineveh uncovered tens of thousands of broken cuneiform fragments. In 1872, a young British museum scholar named George Smith leaned closely over one of these dark clay tablets. As he painstakingly deciphered the ancient wedge-shaped symbols, his hands began to tremble with excitement and profound disbelief. He was reading the 11th tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest surviving epic poem in the history of human literature. And there, written in ancient Akkadian more than 1,000 years before the Hebrew Bible, was a familiar account of a world-destroying flood. The text spoke of an ancient king named Gilgamesh, who traveled to the edge of the world in search of the secret to immortality. There, at the mouth of distant rivers, he met a solitary ancient man who had survived the end of the world, Utnapishtim. In earlier Sumerian accounts, this same survivor was remembered as Ziusudra, and in Babylonian traditions he was called Atrahasis, the exceedingly wise. Sitting beneath the quiet starlight, Utnapishtim began to tell Gilgamesh the secret history of an age that had vanished beneath the waters. He spoke of the ancient city of Shuruppak, a prosperous settlement resting peacefully along the banks of the Euphrates River. In those early days, humanity had multiplied across the fertile plains, filling the earth with bustling noise, daily labor, and endless vitality. But high above the world, the gods grew weary and restless, troubled by the overwhelming clamor and ceaseless tumult of mankind. Led by Enlil, the powerful lord of wind and storms, the council of the gods secretly agreed to unleash a catastrophic deluge. They swore solemn oaths not to reveal their destructive plan to any mortal living upon the fragile earth below. Yet, one deity refused to watch humanity perish in silence. Ea, the god of wisdom, subterranean sweet waters, and deep compassion. Bound by his sacred oath, Ea could not speak directly to Utnapishtim, so he whispered his warning into the reed walls of the man's home. "O reed wall, hear my words," Ea whispered through the wind. "Tear down your house and build a great ship to preserve life. Abandon your worldly wealth, renounce your possessions, and seek only to save the living seed of all creatures upon the earth." Utnapishtim listened to the rustling reeds and understood the urgent divine warning, immediately gathering craftsmen and neighbors to begin construction. Unlike traditional boats, the vessel he constructed was a colossal structure, perfectly balanced in length, width, and height. Its massive wooden frame was reinforced with heavy beams, divided into multiple decks and partitioned into hundreds of secure compartments. Boiling pitch and dark bitumen were poured across the inner and outer hull, sealing every seam against the crushing weight of water. Into this floating sanctuary, Utnapishtim brought his family, skilled craftsmen, domestic livestock, and the wild beasts of the open plains. He loaded stores of grain, sweet honey, fresh oil, and every variety of seed needed to replenish the earth when the storm finally passed. As the final evening arrived, the sky turned a bruised, unnatural purple, and the sun vanished behind towering, suffocating black clouds. Utnapishtim stepped inside the massive vessel, sealed the heavy entryway with dark bitumen, and entrusted their fate to the dark unknown. At dawn, a black cloud rose from the horizon, and Adad, the god of thunder, roared across the trembling sky. The subterranean fountains tore open, the ancient riverbanks collapsed, and torch-bearing deities swept across the land in blinding fire and wind. The tempest turned day into night, raging with such terrifying ferocity that even the gods retreated to the highest heavens, cowering in fear. For 6 days and 7 nights, the wind shrieked, and the torrential deluge smashed across the land like a vast, unstoppable army. When the 7th morning dawned, the shrieking tempest subsided, the violent sea grew calm, and an eerie silence settled over the world. Utnapishtim gently pushed open a small wooden hatch, and a pale beam of morning sunlight fell across his weathered face. He looked out across the horizon, but there was no land left to be seen, only an endless, glass-like expanse of water. The vibrant cities, the bustling fields, and all of humankind had vanished beneath the deep, having returned completely to clay. Overcome with grief and profound awe, the ancient survivor fell to his knees and wept, his tears falling into the silent waters. Slowly drifting across the quiet expanse, the great vessel eventually came to rest upon the craggy peak of Mount Nemush. For 7 days the mountain held the ship fast, while beneath its hull the floodwaters gradually and quietly began to recede. On the 7th day, Utnapishtim released a dove into the pale sky, but finding no resting place, the bird quickly returned. Next he sent forth a swallow, but it too circled the endless water and flew back to the safety of the wooden hull. Finally, he released a raven into the morning breeze. The bird found feeding grounds, waded through the receding mud, and did not return. Knowing the earth was drying at last, Utnapishtim opened the doors of the vessel, allowing the animals to step onto the earth. On the mountain summit, he prepared a sacred altar and poured out fragrant offerings of cedar wood, sweet cane, and myrtle. The sweet aroma drifted upward through the clear mountain air, and the gods gathered around the altar like hungry, wandering spirits. When Enlil arrived and saw that mortals had survived the cataclysm, his initial wrath was quieted by the wise words of Ea. He reminded him that punishment should be measured and just, and that a devastating flood should never again threaten all of creation. Touching the foreheads of Utnapishtim and his wife, Enlil blessed them, declaring that they would henceforth live forever like the gods. They were taken to dwell far across the seas at the tranquil mouth of the world's great rivers, preserved in eternal remembrance. This ancient Mesopotamian story, preserved on sun-dried clay for millennia, forms the earliest written memory of humanity surviving a world-ending flood. It reflects a civilization that knew the immense power of seasonal waters, living between two untamable rivers that could create or destroy life. But, as profound as this Mesopotamian account remains, it was not the only ancient text to preserve the memory of a righteous survivor. Further to the west, along the rugged hills of Canaan, another sacred tradition would record an extraordinarily similar tale of water and salvation. In the opening chapters of the Hebrew Bible, within the sacred verses of the book of Genesis, another ancient voice remembers the great deluge. The story unfolds in a world before memory, a forgotten age when humanity had spread across the fertile lands, multiplying in number and strength. Yet with that growth came a deep and pervasive corruption, as violence, arrogance, and injustice filled the earth from horizon to horizon. Seeing that every inclination of the human heart had turned toward darkness, the Creator looked upon the earth with profound sorrow and grief. The sacred text records a divine resolution to cleanse the creation, allowing the primordial waters to reclaim the land and start anew. But among all the generations of mankind, one man walked faithfully in righteousness and peace amidst the gathering moral shadow: Noah. To Noah came a direct and urgent divine command, warning him of a catastrophic flood that would soon wash across the face of the earth. "Make yourself an ark of gopher wood," the voice commanded, outlining specific dimensions and instructions for a floating sanctuary of life. The vessel was to be 300 cubits in length, 50 cubits in width, and 30 cubits in height, perfectly proportioned for stability. It was designed with 3 distinct internal decks divided into secure compartments, with a single window above and a heavy door set into its side. Inside and out, the wooden hull was to be coated with thick, dark pitch, sealing every seam against the relentless pressures of the coming deep. Noah was instructed to gather his family, his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives into the safety of the vessel. Alongside them, pairs of every living creature under heaven, male and female, were brought into the ark to preserve their seed upon the earth. 7 pairs of every clean animal and bird were also gathered, along with vast stores of food, grain, and provisions for the long voyage. For decades, according to ancient tradition, Noah labored in faith, cutting great timber beams and assembling the colossal ark amidst the mocking gaze of his neighbors. When the appointed time arrived, the final animals were brought inside. Noah and his family crossed the threshold, and the hand of God shut the door. Then on the 17th day of the 2nd month, the cataclysm began with terrifying and overwhelming power across the entire world. The biblical text describes a dual source of water. All the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of heaven were unlocked. Rain poured down in relentless, blinding sheets for 40 days and 40 nights, while subterranean waters surged upward from the broken foundations of the earth. The rivers overflowed their ancient boundaries, the seas marched inland, and the rising waters lifted the massive wooden ark high above the drowning ground. Higher and higher the waters climbed, submerging the cultivated valleys, swallowing the hills, and finally covering the highest mountain peaks under heaven. Every living thing that moved on the dry land perished, and the bustling cities of the ancient world were erased beneath a vast, silent ocean. For 150 days the waters prevailed upon the earth, and the solitary ark drifted aimlessly across an endless, shoreless expanse. But in the profound silence of that watery wilderness, the sacred narrative records a turning point. God remembered Noah and all the living creatures with him. A gentle, steady wind was sent across the face of the waters, the fountains of the deep were closed, and the rain ceased to fall. Slowly and quietly, the immense floodwaters began to recede, draining away into the vast subterranean hollows and newly forming sea basins. On the 17th day of the 7th month, after months of perilous drifting, the massive ark came to rest upon the rugged mountains of Ararat. As the weeks passed, the tops of neighboring mountain peaks slowly emerged like lonely stone islands amidst a retreating sea of clouds. Waiting for the land to dry, Noah opened the small upper window and released a black raven into the open mountain air. The sturdy bird flew back and forth across the crags, finding resting places among the emerging rocks until the lower waters had dried. Next, Noah sent forth a gentle dove to see if the soil of the valleys had become dry and habitable once again. Finding no resting place for the sole of her foot, the dove returned to the ark, and Noah reached out his hand and brought her inside. 7 days later, he released the dove a second time into the pale morning sky, waiting patiently for her return at twilight. When the dove flew back in the evening breeze, there in her beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf, a fragile sign of returning life. Noah waited yet another 7 days and sent the dove out once more, but this time she did not return, having found a home in the renewed green earth. On the first day of the new year, Noah removed the heavy wooden covering of the ark and looked out across the transformed landscape. The surface of the ground was dry, cleansed of its former violence, and bathed in the warm, gentle light of a new dawn. At the divine command, Noah opened the great doors, and every animal, beast, and bird stepped out onto the mountain slopes to multiply and flourish. On the mountain summit, Noah built a simple stone altar to the Lord and offered clean sacrifices in gratitude for their miraculous deliverance. The fragrance of the offering was pleasing, and a solemn promise was made that never again would a universal flood destroy the living earth. While the earth remains, the ancient covenant declared, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Across the clearing sky, glowing in vibrant crimson, gold, and indigo against the retreating storm clouds, appeared the sign of the covenant, a rainbow. It stood as a permanent arch between heaven and earth, a visual guarantee that the waters would never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The parallels between Noah's account and the older Mesopotamian epic of Utnapishtim are both striking and impossible to overlook. Both feature a chosen righteous man, an explicit divine warning, a massive pitch-sealed vessel, the preservation of animal species, and the release of birds. Yet the Hebrew narrative shifts the philosophical focus from the capricious annoyance of rival deities to a profound moral framework of justice, judgment, and renewal. The flood in Genesis is not an accident of noisy humans disturbing sleeping gods, but a moral cleansing that restores harmony to a corrupted creation. For thousands of years, this powerful story has anchored itself in Western literature, theology, and the collective memory of countless generations. But as our journey continues across the ancient world, we discover that the lands bordering the Mediterranean remembered this great cleansing in yet another way. To the north, across the azure waters of the Aegean Sea, the poets of ancient Greece were about to tell their own unforgettable story of surviving the flood. Across the sun-drenched waters of the Aegean Sea, the poets and philosophers of ancient Greece preserved their own memory of a great celestial cleansing. In the earliest Greek traditions, humanity did not begin in a single moment, but passed through successive ages of gold, silver, and bronze. By the Bronze Age, mankind had grown arrogant, fierce, and utterly devoid of reverence, filling the fertile valleys of Arcadia with lawlessness and bloodshed. To test their wickedness, Zeus, the king of the Olympian gods, disguised himself as a humble traveler and walked among the cities of mortal men. Upon witnessing the unspeakable cruelty of King Lycaon, Zeus resolved to extinguish the corrupted human race and wipe clean the face of the earth. Fearing that his blazing thunderbolts might ignite the heavens themselves, Zeus chose a different weapon, an overwhelming deluge of dark, unstoppable water. He locked away the dry northern winds and unleashed Notus, the south wind, whose heavy wings swept across the skies with perpetual storm clouds. Relentless rain poured from the heavens, while Poseidon struck the earth with his trident, shattering riverbanks and calling forth the surging seas. Yet amidst the impending doom, one mortal possessed the wisdom and foresight to survive the catastrophe. Deucalion, the king of Phthia in Thessaly. Deucalion was the mortal son of Prometheus, the titan who had once stolen sacred fire from the gods to bestow civilization upon mankind. Loving his son and refusing to watch human life perish, Prometheus sent an urgent secret warning, advising Deucalion to build a massive wooden chest. Known in the ancient Greek accounts as a larnax, this sturdy wooden vessel was built not for sailing, but purely for survival and shelter. Into this wooden haven stepped Deucalion and his virtuous wife Pyrrha, the daughter of Epimetheus and Pandora, bringing provisions for an unknown voyage. As the heavy lid closed, the ocean engulfed the Greek mainland, swallowing temples, fertile vineyards, and every mountain range beneath a shoreless grey expanse. For 9 days and 9 nights the solitary wooden chest tossed upon the violent surface, drifting aimlessly across the submerged valleys of Hellas. When the tempest finally began to quiet, the chest came to rest upon the jagged, mist-covered heights of Mount Parnassus, rising above the clouds. Looking out over the retreating sea, Zeus observed that only 2 pious and blameless mortals remained alive, and his divine wrath slowly faded. Poseidon commanded the sea god Triton to blow upon his giant conch shell, sounding a resonant tone that called the floodwaters back into their basins. Stepping out onto the cold, damp stone of the mountain peak, Deucalion and Pyrrha found themselves entirely alone in a silent and desolate world. Weeping for the lost race of mankind, they made their way down the mountain slopes to the ancient moss-covered sanctuary of Themis, goddess of divine justice. Kneeling before the cold and silent altar, the weeping survivors prayed for guidance, asking how humanity might ever be restored to the empty earth. Through the whispering mountain wind came a mysterious oracle. "Depart from the temple, veil your heads, unloose your garments, and cast behind you the bones of your mother. Horrified by the seemingly sacrilegious command, Pyrrha refused to dishonor the physical remains of her ancestors, weeping in confusion before the ancient altar. But Deucalion, meditating deeply upon the divine riddle, realized that the great earth itself was the universal mother of all living things. Her bones were not human skeletons, but the ancient river stones and weathered rocks resting along the slopes of the sacred mountain. Trusting the oracle, the couple veiled their faces and began walking forward, casting handfuls of hard river stones over their shoulders into the mud. As the stones struck the damp earth, an extraordinary transformation began. The hard rock softened, became pliable, and took on human shape. The veins in the stone became veins of blood, the solid mass became flesh, and the rough contours transformed into living limbs and breathing forms. The stones cast by Deucalion rose as strong, resilient men, while the stones thrown by Pyrrha blossomed into the first women of a renewed world. In ancient Greek lore, this poetic rebirth explained the enduring resilience of mankind, born directly from the steadfast and enduring bones of the earth. Unlike the Mesopotamian and Hebrew arcs that carried animals and physical seeds, the Greek myth presents a symbolic rebirth drawn directly from nature itself. The flood of Deucalion served to cleanse the world of hubris, leaving behind a harder, more humble generation capable of enduring life's trials. Yet, as we journey further eastward beyond the Mediterranean, across the fertile river valleys of India, we encounter another legendary survivor of the deep. There, beside a sacred river, an ancient king would be warned of a cosmic deluge, not by a titan, but by a creature of the waters. Far to the east, beyond rugged mountain passes and sweeping plains, the sacred traditions of ancient India preserved an extraordinary memory of universal waters. In the worldview of ancient Vedic cosmology, time does not flow in a linear path, but moves in vast, majestic, cosmic cycles without beginning or end. These immense epochs, known as yugas and kalpas, turn like giant celestial wheels, guiding the universe through phases of creation, flourishing, and inevitable dissolution. At the close of each cosmic age, known as a pralaya, the manifested universe gently dissolves, resting beneath an infinite ocean of quiet primordial water. In the twilight of one such fading age, long before our modern era began, there lived a devout and noble royal sage named King Satyavrata. Known to later generations as Vaivasvata Manu, this righteous monarch had renounced worldly power, choosing a quiet life of meditation and spiritual devotion beside sacred waters. One serene morning, while performing his daily ritual ablutions in the tranquil waters of the river Kritamala, Manu cupped his hands to offer water to the sun. As he lifted his hands from the cool surface, he was startled to find a tiny, shimmering golden fish resting gently inside his palms. As the king prepared to release the little creature back into the stream, a small, desperate voice whispered up from his wet hands, pleading for protection. "O compassionate king," the tiny fish cried, "do not throw me back into the river where larger predators will hunt and devour a helpless creature like me." Moved by deep pity and guided by Dharma, the sacred duty of universal compassion, Manu placed the tiny golden creature into his water pot. But during the quiet hours of that very night, an extraordinary transformation took place as the fish expanded until the small earthen vessel could no longer contain it. The following morning, the creature spoke again, requesting a larger sanctuary, and Manu gently carried the expanding golden fish to a deep earthen water cistern. Yet within a single day, the fish grew so large that its body filled the entire reservoir, asking once more for deeper and wider waters to swim. Patiently, the king transferred the magnificent creature to a wide lake, but within days its shimmering golden form stretched from one verdant shore to the other. Seeing no other choice, Manu led a procession to the sacred river itself, releasing the colossal, gleaming fish into the deep and flowing currents of the stream. Yet even the mighty river could not hold the divine creature for long, and it soon expanded until its golden scales blocked the entire flow of water. Finally, Manu guided the fish to the boundless ocean, watching in profound wonder as the immense creature slipped effortlessly into the deep, endless salt waters. As the fish turned to face the shore, its radiant golden horn and luminous scales lit up the entire sea, spanning miles across the vast horizon. Realizing that he was standing in the presence of a supreme celestial power, Manu bowed low upon the sand and asked the true identity of the magnificent being. The great fish revealed itself as Matsya, the very first earthly avatar of Lord Vishnu, the supreme preserver and eternal guardian of universal cosmic balance. "In 7 days," Matsya proclaimed in a voice like distant rolling thunder, "the cosmic cycle will close, and an ocean of dissolution will swallow the 3 worlds. All earthly kingdoms, mountains, and forests will be submerged beneath the deep as the universe enters its long period of restorative cosmic sleep. You must build a colossal, sturdy wooden ship capable of withstanding the immense turbulent currents of the shoreless waters that will cover the face of the earth. Gather within its holds the seeds of every living plant, the medicinal herbs of the forests, and healthy pairs of all living creatures upon the earth. And most importantly, you must invite the Saptarishi, the 7 ancient enlightened sages who safeguard the sacred wisdom, philosophy, and hymns of the eternal Vedas. When the dark tempest rises and the waters lift your vessel from the earth, wait patiently, for I shall return to guide you across the shoreless sea." Manu listened with profound devotion, gathering the finest timber to construct a massive vessel, sealing its hull against the crushing weight of the coming waters. Across the subcontinent, he collected the fertile seeds of grains, fruits, and healing plants, carefully packing them in dry clay jars inside the vessel's dark holds. When the 7th day arrived, ominous dark clouds, known as Samvataka, gathered across the 4 corners of heaven, turning the midday sky into total midnight darkness. The cosmic floodgates opened with terrifying power, pouring relentless torrential rains, while subterranean oceans broke through the cracked bedrock of the world. The seas surged relentlessly inland, sweeping over plains, drowning ancient cities, and covering the highest hills beneath a rising, turbulent expanse of black water. As the land vanished beneath the waves, Manu, his family, and the 7 venerable sages boarded the great ship, which lifted gently onto the swollen floodwaters. In the heart of the terrifying storm, a brilliant golden luminescence parted the dark waves, and the colossal horned avatar, Matsya, rose majestically from the deep. Following the deity's previous instruction, Manu summoned the great king of serpents, Vasuki, whose long, coiled body served as a mighty cosmic mooring cable. With steady hands, Manu bound the sacred living cord securely around the great vessel's prow and fastened it to the radiant horn atop Matsya's head. Through the howling winds and towering waves of the cosmic night, the divine fish towed the sanctuary of life across the boundless submerged world. For countless months, While all earthly landmarks lay hidden beneath the silent depths, the great golden avatar guided the vessel through darkness toward the north. During this long and tranquil voyage upon the waters of dissolution, Matsya spoke to Manu and the 7 sages, imparting the sacred dialogue of the Matsya Purana. The divine avatar revealed the secrets of the cosmos, the laws of spiritual evolution, and the eternal truths of Dharma that would govern the coming age of humanity. While the old world rested quietly beneath the waves, the wisdom of the ages was preserved, unbroken and luminous, within the safe sanctuary of the floating ark. When the cosmic storm at last began to subside, Matsya gently steered the ship toward the highest snow-covered heights of the majestic northern mountains. The vessel came to rest upon a towering, mist-shrouded peak of the Himalayas, known in ancient Sanskrit literature as Naubandhana, the mountain where the ship was bound. Matsya instructed Manu to secure the vessel to the rocky pinnacle, advising the survivors to descend slowly into the valleys only as the waters gradually receded. With a final radiant glance, the golden avatar submerged back into the tranquil depths, having completed his sacred mission of preserving the seeds of existence. As the weeks passed, warm sunlight warmed the mountain slopes, and the floodwaters quietly drained away, revealing rich, fertile silt across the transformed valleys. Stepping onto the fresh, damp earth beneath a clear blue sky, Manu and the sages performed sacred fire offerings of gratitude, dedicating the renewed world to harmony. The preserved seeds were planted in the nutrient-rich soil, the animals roamed freely across green pastures, and the eternal teachings of the Vedas were taught once more. Unlike many Western accounts where a flood represents purely divine wrath and moral punishment, the Indian deluge is viewed as a natural, rhythmic transition of cosmic time. It is not a tale of despair, but an inspiring demonstration of divine grace, ensuring that truth, wisdom, and life can never be permanently destroyed by water. The poetic image of a golden fish swimming through a cosmic night remains one of humanity's most beautiful metaphors for faith and safe passage through chaos. But as our journey continues eastward across the towering mountain walls of Asia, the ancient memory of great waters takes on an entirely different character. In the vast river valleys of ancient China, humanity would face the roaring deluge not by seeking refuge in an ark, but through unprecedented collective labor and ingenuity. Far beyond the mountain peaks of the ancient Near East, across the vast river valleys of East Asia, the memory of water takes on an extraordinary transformation. In ancient Chinese tradition, the Great Deluge was not an inescapable cosmic doom where humanity simply hid inside a wooden vessel, waiting for salvation. It was remembered as a relentless 9-year catastrophe, a colossal test of human endurance, communal resilience, and groundbreaking ecological engineering. During the legendary reigns of Emperor Yao and Emperor Shun, the mighty Yellow River burst its banks, swallowing fertile valleys and drowning mountain foothills beneath muddy torrents. The skies wept without ceasing, rivers merged into a vast inland sea, and wild predatory beasts drove surviving human communities onto high cliffs and tree branches. In earlier mythic traditions, this celestial disruption was traced back to the water god Gonggong, who struck the sacred pillar of Mount Buzhou in furious rebellion. The sky tilted toward the northwest, the earth sank toward the southeast, and celestial fires and surging waters tore across the helpless mortal world. Seeing the suffering of mortals, the benevolent creator goddess Nua smelted 5 colored stones to mend the cracked sky, cutting the legs of a giant turtle to support the heavens. Yet, Even after the sky was repaired, torrential waters continued to churn through the heartland, threatening the very foundations of early Chinese civilization. Emperor Yao first appointed a determined leader named Gun to tame the raging deluge and rescue the displaced people from the rising waters. Gun stole the magical expanding earth known as Zirang from the heavenly sovereign, using it to build towering dams and dikes to block the surging rivers. But the force of the water proved too immense. After 9 long years of struggle, the overloaded earthen dams collapsed, unleashing even greater destruction upon the valleys. Realizing that water cannot be conquered through stubborn resistance, Emperor Shun tasked Gun's noble son, Yu, to continue the monumental mission of flood control. Yu understood that instead of blocking the immense power of the water, he had to work in harmony with nature, guiding the currents along their natural courses. For 13 grueling years, Yu traveled across the land with a measuring cord and compass, mobilizing hundreds of thousands of workers to dredge silted river channels. Rather than building walls to trap the floods, he cut deep canals and cleared natural river paths, directing the overflowing waters safely toward the eastern sea. Legend tells that he cleaved through towering mountain ranges with bronze tools, carving the famous Longmen Gorge to allow the mighty Yellow River to flow smoothly. So deeply dedicated was Yu to his sacred duty that he passed his own home 3 separate times without ever stepping inside, despite hearing his infant child weeping. Through perseverance, wisdom, and unyielding labor, Yu tamed the great waters, divided the land into 9 fertile provinces, and established the legendary Xie dynasty. In China, the flood myth became a powerful cultural anthem of human agency, where survival was earned not through passive retreat, but through collective ingenuity and steadfast perseverance. As we travel further south into the lush, tropical river valleys and dense rainforests of Southeast Asia, another poetic flood tradition begins to emerge. Among the indigenous cultures of Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, and southern China, the Great Flood is remembered through the humble and protective vessel of a gourd. Ancient tribal folklore tells of a cosmic storm sent by the heavens, turning the tropical valleys into an endless, warm expanse of swirling water. In these traditions, a young brother and sister were warned by a mystical animal, such as a benevolent bird or a wise woodland spirit, of the coming deluge. Following the guidance, the siblings hollowed out an enormous dried bottle gourd, climbing inside its natural wooden shell with seeds, grains, and provisions. As the torrential rains fell and the jungle rivers overflowed, the giant gourd floated safely upon the surface of the boundless water, rocking like a cradle. For many days, the floating fruit drifted across submerged jungle canopies and drowned limestone casts, completely insulated from the swirling currents and torrential storms outside. When the rains finally ceased and the warm, tropical sun returned, the gourd came to rest gently upon the fertile slope of a high mountain peak. Stepping out into a transformed and silent landscape, the brother and sister found themselves the sole survivors of a pristine, green, and newly washed earth. To repopulate the empty world, they planted the mystical seeds preserved inside the gourd, giving birth to the diverse ethnic tribes and communities of the region. Here, the vessel of salvation was not a massive ship, crafted from hewn timber, but a humble fruit gifted directly by the fertile bounty of nature itself. Leaving the Asian mainland behind, our journey now carries us far out across the turquoise waters of the vast and endless Pacific Ocean. Scattered across thousands of remote volcanic islands, the seafaring peoples of Polynesia preserved their own profound memories of a world swallowed by rising tides. In ancient Hawaiian lore, The tradition speaks of Kai Akahinali, the great ocean flood sent by the sea goddess to wash away corruption and restore cosmic balance. A righteous man named Nuu was commanded to construct a massive sailing canoe, upon which he built a sturdy wooden house to protect his family and animals. When the ocean swelled and engulfed the volcanic peaks, Nuu's great double-hulled vessel sailed safely across the submerged islands beneath a star-filled celestial sky. When the waters receded, the vessel came to rest on the sacred summit of Mauna Kea, where Nuu offered gratitude to the gods with traditional sacrifices. Further south, in the tranquil lagoons of Tahiti and the Society Islands, legends recount the wrath of Ruahatu, the supreme lord of the ocean deep. An unwitting fisherman disturbed the sacred resting place of the ocean god, provoking a furious swell of tidal waters that engulfed every island in the archipelago. Taking pity on the repentant fisherman, Ruahatu instructed him to take his family and animals to the isolated coral motu of Toamarama, which remained untouched above the waves. Across New Zealand, the Maori traditions preserve ancient chants of Hurihanga Tipo, the great turning of the night, when boundless waters transform the ancestral landscape. For island navigators who lived intimately with the sea, the ocean was both a highway of discovery and an unpredictable power capable of erasing shores overnight. Whether facing the roaring Yellow River, floating inside a forest gorge, or navigating an ocean deluge, humanity repeatedly turned to the same profound archetype. In every corner of the Eastern world and the vast Pacific, water was recognized as the ultimate arbiter between an old, corrupted world and a fresh beginning. But this global memory does not end with the shores of Asia or the coral atolls of the Pacific Ocean. Across the vast eastern horizon, a new continent lay waiting, home to ancient civilizations with their own dramatic accounts of water, creation, and renewal. In the high mountain plateaus of the Andes and the dense rainforests of Central America, the memory of a great deluge was deeply engraved in stone and sacred glyphs. This is where our journey carries us next, as we travel into the sacred traditions and ancient stone carvings of the Americas. Across the vast expanse of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, the ancient continents of the Americas held their own profound memories of cosmic water. Long before European ships sailed toward their shores, indigenous civilizations in the Americas recorded dramatic histories of worlds created, destroyed, and reborn. In the misty highlands of Guatemala, the sacred Mayan text known as the Popol Vuh preserves the epic story of early creation. According to the Mayan creators, the gods fashioned several experimental generations of beings before crafting true humanity from sacred white and yellow corn. The second creation produced beings carved of wood who could speak and multiply but possessed no hearts, no minds, and no memory of their makers. Lacking reverence and empathy, these wooden mannequins neglected their sacred duties, mistreated the creatures of the forest, and abused their stone tools. To cleanse the earth of this hollow race, the heart of sky unleashed a terrifying deluge of thick, sticky black resin and endless torrential rains. The waters surged from the earth and poured from the blackened sky, while household animals and kitchen grindstones rebelled against their cruel masters. The wooden people were utterly destroyed beneath the dark deluge, and those few who escaped into the jungle canopies became the forest monkeys. Further north, in the high valley of Mexico, the Aztec civilization envisioned cosmic time as a succession of 5 vast suns or world ages. Each world age flourished under the reign of a different primordial sun, and each ended in a massive cosmic cataclysm of elemental destruction. The 4th world age was known as Nahui Atl, or Four Water, a prosperous era ruled over by the benevolent water goddess Chalkutlikyu. At the close of this fourth era, torrential celestial waters poured down for 52 continuous years, completely submerging the earth beneath a boundless ocean. The mountains disappeared beneath the floodwaters, the sky collapsed upon the drowning plains, and the human inhabitants were transformed into schools of fish. In certain Aztec traditions, a virtuous man named Coxcox and his wife Xochiquetzal survived the deluge by sealing themselves inside a hollow cypress log. In other variants, a righteous couple named Tata and Nene were instructed by the god Tezcatlipoca to hollow out a massive ahuehuete tree trunk. Floating peacefully across the vast submerged plains, the wooden shelter protected them until the waters receded and the summit of Mount Colhuacan emerged. Traveling south into the towering snow-capped heights of the Andes, the ancient Inca civilization remembered a profound cataclysm called Utnapishtim, meaning the overturning of space and time through water. Pachacuti was a cosmic cleansing orchestrated by the supreme creator deity Viracocha. In the earliest days of creation, Viracocha had carved a race of arrogant giants out of stone, but grew displeased with their unruly defiance. To wash away the giants and purify the world, Viracocha summoned a relentless 60-day deluge that swallowed the deepest valleys and highest peaks. Ancient Andean oral tradition tells of a humble llama shepherd who noticed his animals staring mournfully at the night constellations above the mountains. When the shepherd questioned his flock, the lead llama spoke, warning that the stars predicted an imminent flood that would drown the entire continent. Gathering his family, the shepherd drove his herd to the highest peak of Mount Ancasmarca, ascending step by step as the dark waters rose behind them. As the floodwaters climbed, the mountain magically expanded upward into the clouds, keeping its snowy peak and its passengers safe above the waves. When the deluge finally subsided, Viracocha walked upon the tranquil waters of Lake Titicaca, commanding the sun, moon, and stars to shine again. From the sacred islands of Lake Titicaca, the Creator fashioned a new, humble race of humans from clay, breathing life into a renewed Andean world. Across the vast forest, prairies, and waterways of North America, indigenous tribes preserved their own sacred traditions of universal waters and rebirth. Among the Ojibwe and Anishinaabe peoples, the heroic culture figure Nanabojo looked upon a world completely flooded by water after a great cosmic battle. Sitting stranded upon a giant pine raft with surviving woodland creatures, Nanabojo sought a way to recreate dry land for all living things. He called upon various animals to dive into the deep, dark waters and retrieve a single speck of primeval earth from the submerged bottom. The swift loon, the brave beaver, and the otter all dove deep into the abyss, but each returned, exhausted and empty-handed, to the raft. Finally, the humble little muskrat volunteered, remaining beneath the freezing water so long that the other animals feared he had drowned. When the muskrat floated to the surface, he had given his life, but tightly clutched in his tiny paw was a grain of sacred mud. Nanabojo placed the precious grain of earth onto the back of a giant turtle, where it magically expanded into a vast continent known as Turtle Island. In Cherokee lore, a faithful dog warned its master each evening by barking toward the sky, revealing that an inescapable deluge was fast approaching. The dog instructed its master to build a sturdy wooden canoe and gather provisions, allowing the family to float safely while the mountains vanished beneath water. In traditions across the American continent, water is never merely an agent of destruction, but a sacred womb through which the earth is cleansed and reborn. Animals in these stories often serve as divine messengers, spirit guides, and brave co-creators who ensure the survival and restoration of the natural world. The striking similarities between these diverse indigenous traditions and Old World flood accounts continue to captivate scholars, historians, and storytellers across the globe. How could civilizations separated by vast oceans, differing languages, and thousands of years of geography all share this vivid archetype of a drowned world? Were these ancient stories purely symbolic reflections of cosmic cycles, spiritual cleansing, and the psychological fragility of early human settlements? Or did our ancient ancestors witness real, devastating geological cataclysms that permanently reshaped the coastlines and landscapes of the prehistoric Earth? To answer these questions, we must leave the realm of mythology and enter the rigorous scientific world of modern geology, oceanography, and archaeology. We must travel back 10,000 years to the end of the last ice age, when towering glacial walls collapsed and global sea levels rose dramatically. This is where myth meets science, as we explore the real geological events that may have inspired humanity's enduring memory of the Great Flood. For centuries, scholars, theologians, and explorers searched the highest peaks of the Earth, hoping to uncover physical remnants of a single worldwide wooden ark. Yet modern geology, paleoclimatology, and oceanography reveal a far more fascinating reality about our planet's turbulent and ever-shifting ancient past. There is no geological evidence of a single planetary flood covering all mountains simultaneously during the brief history of human existence on Earth. Instead, the prehistoric world experienced a series of immense, localized, and regional cataclysms that permanently reshaped coastlines and altered entire ecosystems. To find the true roots of these ancient memories, we must travel back approximately 20,000 years to the height of the last glacial maximum. During this frozen epoch, massive continental ice sheets miles thick locked up colossal volumes of water across North America, Northern Europe, and Asia. Because so much water was frozen as solid ice, global sea levels were more than 120 meters lower than they are today. Vast expanses of fertile land that now rest beneath ocean waves were once dry, thriving valleys populated by prehistoric human, hunter-gatherers, and wildlife. In Europe, a vast inhabited plain known as Deucalion connected the British Isles directly to the mainland across what is now the cold North Sea. In Southeast Asia, the shallow continental shelf formed Sunderland, a massive tropical landmass uniting modern islands of Indonesia into a continuous subcontinent. Between Siberia and Alaska lay Beringia, a vast tundra land bridge across which early human ancestors migrated into the pristine wilderness of the Americas. Then around 19,000 years ago, the global climate began to warm, initiating a dramatic, prolonged collapse of the planetary ice sheets. This glacial retreat was not always slow and peaceful, but was punctuated by sudden, violent episodes known to modern scientists as meltwater pulses. During these rapid warming phases, billions of tons of glacial meltwater poured into the world's oceans, causing global sea levels to rise at astonishing speeds. Ancient coastlines receded rapidly, swallowing hunting grounds, drowning river deltas, and forcing countless prehistoric communities to flee inland toward higher, safer ground. Beyond global sea level rise, the interior of continents witnessed sudden and violent catastrophes caused by the catastrophic failure of ancient glacial dams. In North America, the colossal glacial Lake Missoula was held back by towering walls of ice until catastrophic fractures unleashed unimaginable walls of water. Within hours, a wall of water, hundreds of feet high, rushed across the landscape, carving the scarred, channeled scablands of Washington at terrifying velocity. Similar catastrophic outburst floods swept across prehistoric Siberia the Altai Mountains, and Central Europe, erasing valleys and everything in their path overnight. Perhaps the most famous marine flooding event occurred in the Black Sea basin roughly 7,600 years before the present era. According to marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman, the ancient Black Sea was once an isolated, tranquil freshwater lake surrounded by fertile settlements. As rising Mediterranean waters swelled against the narrow land bridge of the Bosporus, the natural dam eventually fractured under immense hydrostatic pressure. Seawater poured through the breached gorge with the force of hundreds of Niagara Falls, roaring relentlessly for months across the peaceful freshwater basin. The rising saltwater flooded hundreds of square miles of inhabited shoreline, driving ancient farming communities outward in desperate migratory waves across Europe and Asia. For the people who fled this sudden inundation, the world they had known for generations literally disappeared forever beneath dark, salty waves. In other parts of the world, massive submarine landslides triggered towering tsunamis that struck ancient coastal settlements without a single moment of warning. Around 8,000 years ago, the Storegga slide off the coast of Norway sent colossal tidal waves crashing against the fragile shores of Doggerland. A wall of water swept across low-lying marshes and settlements, permanently submerging the inhabited heartland beneath the churning grey waters of the North Sea. In river deltas like Mesopotamia and the Yellow River Basin, intense seasonal monsoons and tectonic shifts periodically created historic, unprecedented megafloods. When extreme rainfall coincided with high ocean tides and swollen river headwaters, entire floodplains turned into seamless, horizon-to-horizon inland oceans. To an ancient human living in a small valley or coastal inlet, a disaster of this scale was not merely a local weather event. With no maps, no satellites, and no understanding of planetary geography, the drowning of their entire known territory was effectively the end of the world. The survivors carried the traumatic memory of the day the water came, preserving the horror and the miracle of their survival around campfires. Passed down across hundreds of generations of oral tradition, these historical memories slowly blended with myth, spiritual reflection, and moral philosophy. The real melting of glaciers, collapsing dams, and rising seas became transformed into tales of divine displeasure, chosen righteous survivors, and floating arks. Science does not diminish the beauty or importance of these ancient myths. Rather, it illuminates the genuine human courage behind every single story. It reveals that behind the poetic imagery of arks, fish, and floating gourds lies the profound memory of our ancestors surviving a changing planet. But why did human imagination across all continents choose water above all other elements to carry this profound message of destruction and rebirth? To understand the deeper psychological and symbolic power of the deluge, we must examine what water truly meant to the ancient human mind. This is the mystery of the universal archetype, where the physical reality of water transforms into the timeless language of the human soul. Beyond the physical reality of melting glaciers and prehistoric tsunamis, the flood myth holds a profound place within human psychology. For thousands of years, across cultures that never met, the human mind repeatedly chose water as the ultimate symbol of cosmic transformation. Water is unlike any other element in the natural world, possessing a mysterious duality that touches both creation and absolute destruction. It is the gentle rain that nourishes crops and quenches thirst, yet it is also the raging torrent that tears civilizations from the earth. In almost every ancient cosmology, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, the universe begins not on solid ground, but upon a vast, dark, primeval ocean. Before light was called forth, before the sky was separated from the earth, Existence was envisioned as an infinite, unformed expanse of watery chaos. When the world is overwhelmed by moral corruption or cosmic exhaustion, the deluge represents a return to that original, unformed state of being. The flood is not merely an act of catastrophic violence, but a profound act of universal purification, washing away the accumulated stains of time. It erases the broken structures, the forgotten laws, and the arrogant hubris of an old world that had lost its harmony with nature. In the psychological framework of Carl Jung, the vast ocean represents the deep unconscious mind, boundless, mysterious, and full of hidden depths. To be swallowed by water is to descend into the shadow of the unknown, surrendering control and confronting the fragility of our mortal existence. Yet in every flood tradition, from the Mesopotamian ark to the Indian fish, the descent into water is never the final destination of mankind. Floating upon the dark expanse, the wooden vessel, the hollow tree, and the dried gourd become profound symbols of the human soul. The ark is a floating sanctuary of life, carrying within its sheltered hold the seeds of memories, ethics, wisdom, and future possibilities. It preserves the sacred spark of consciousness through the longest, darkest night, trusting that a new morning will inevitably dawn across the deep. And when the waters finally recede, the emergence onto dry land is celebrated as a miraculous rebirth, an elemental resurrection of life. The survivor who steps onto the cleansed mountain peak is no longer the same person who witnessed the destruction of the ancient valleys. They have crossed a profound threshold between two distinct ages, carrying the heavy memory of the past and the responsibility of the future. This ancient rhythm of destruction, preservation, and renewal reflects the deepest cycles of human psychological and emotional experience. In our individual lives, we frequently encounter our own personal deluges, moments when the stable structures of our world collapse in an instant. A sudden loss, an overwhelming transition, or a profound crisis can feel like a rising flood, washing away everything we once took for granted. Yet within that quiet void, when all familiar landmarks have disappeared beneath the surface, we are forced to discover what truly matters. We learn what essential seeds of wisdom, compassion, and resilience we must carry forward into the uncharted territory of our lives. The flood story reminds us that destruction is rarely absolute. It is often the quiet, necessary prelude to a profound renewal. Across thousands of years, our ancestors gathered around evening campfires, repeating these sacred tales, not to terrify their children, but to comfort them. They told these stories to teach future generations that even when the darkest storms rage, the fragile human spirit can endure and rebuild. The ark will find its mountain peak, the dove will bring back an olive leaf, and the green earth will blossom once again. This enduring narrative is the universal heritage of our species, an unbroken thread of memory connecting us with every ancestor who looked at the sky. It is the timeless reminder that humanity is deeply interwoven with the rhythms of the earth, subject to its power and blessed by its beauty. And as the great flood stories of the world draw toward their quiet conclusion, we prepare to leave the ancient myths behind. We prepare to return from the turbulent waters of antiquity, settling our minds into the gentle, tranquil stillness of the present night. And so, our long journey across the ancient waters of human memory draws to its quiet, peaceful close tonight. We have traveled across vast oceans of time, listening to the voices of ancestors who looked upon the deluge with wonder and awe. From the mud-brick towers of ancient Mesopotamia to the misty peaks of Ararat, the memory of water has spoken across the centuries. We watched Deucalion cast stones upon Greek mountain crags and saw the golden-horned fish guide Manu through the cosmic night. We witnessed the unyielding perseverance of Emperor Yu, the floating tropical gourds, and the courageous animals of the ancient Americas. In every distant corner of the earth, the great storms have settled, the floodwaters have receded, and the green land rests in peace. Now the turbulent tempests of antiquity dissolve into the quiet sanctuary of this present moment, here in the soft embrace of night. Allow the ancient stories to drift away like mist, rising from calm waters, leaving your mind serene, quiet, and completely still. Take a slow, deep breath in, drawing in the cool, gentle air of the evening, and exhale all tension from your body. Feel the weight of the day releasing from your shoulders, your chest, your hands, and sinking softly into the welcoming bed below. With every gentle breath you take, feel yourself floating upon a mirror-smooth lake beneath a vast canopy of silver stars. The water beneath you is calm, warm, and utterly peaceful, supporting you effortlessly in this quiet sanctuary of absolute rest. There are no more storms to navigate, no more mountains to seek, and no more waves to endure in the dark. Listen to the soft, rhythmic sound of gentle ripples lapping against the shore, steady and comforting like a timeless heartbeat. The ancient ark has found its mountain, the dove has returned to its quiet nest, and all the world is at peace. Let your thoughts settle like fine grains of river silt, sinking slowly to the quiet, undisturbed bottom of a tranquil stream. A gentle breeze whispers through the ancient olive groves, carrying away the last echoes of the day into the boundless night sky. The stars above shine with a steady, ancient luminescence, watching over your quiet slumber just as they watched over our ancestors. You are safe, you are protected, and you are held gently within the eternal, peaceful rhythms of the living earth. Feel a soothing wave of warmth and relaxation spreading slowly through your limbs, softening every muscle and calming your spirit. Drift deeper and deeper into the quiet stillness, letting go of all effort, all thought, and all lingering concerns of the day. The waters are still, the sky is clear, and the night welcomes you into its vast, comforting, and restorative embrace. Rest now in profound tranquility, letting yourself sink effortlessly into a deep, restorative, and uninterrupted sleep through the quiet night. Good night, quiet traveler. Sleep deeply, sleep peacefully, and rest securely until the gentle light of a brand new dawn